Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Deptula, Dean of the Mitchell Institute of Aerospace Studies, and welcome to the West Coast Aerospace Forum. This is a joint endeavor between Mitchell Institute, RAND Corporation, Aerospace Corporation, MITRE, and CSIS that we've very much enjoyed co-hosting for the last several years. This year, however, health concerns have caused us to pursue this virtual format. Now, while I certainly miss seeing friends and having the opportunity to exchange ideas in person, this format does have an upside in that we're able to share this important conversation with a far broader audience. So if you like what you see, please look to join us in California next year when we've hopefully turned the page on COVID-19. In the meantime, I'm most pleased to host a top-notch panel to discuss what it means to actualize joint all-domain command and control. We're really pleased to welcome Lt Gen Q Hinote, Brigadier General David Abba, Dr. Tim Grayson, and Ms. Heather Penney. And I'll give you a little bit more on their backgrounds here shortly. But let me cut to the chase for a bit of context. For the past several years, the Department of Defense has lagged the rest of the world in moving from the industrial age to the information age. The military is still too focused on traditional weapon systems without prioritizing how to harness data, processing power, connectivity, and decision quality information as a weapon system of its own. Let's be honest, it's a lot easier to count airplanes on a ramp than consider abstract notions of connectivity. However, with the rise of peer competitors, the notion of modernizing how we wage war is no longer a nice to do. It's become an existential imperative. You may have heard me talk about this over the years using the idea of building a combat cloud. Here's the good news. Current leaders in the Department of Defense have finally caught on and fully embraced the need to move in this direction. They're all in, sort of. The overarching concept now in play is branded the Joint All-Domain Command and Control concept. It's all about the ability to gather data from a broad range of sources, fuse it to best understand the operating environment, and then harness it as actionable situational awareness. In other words, using connectivity to drive collaborative engagement between various mission actors in a highly dynamic, rapidly composable fashion. Simple example might involve a B-21 or an F-35 in enemy airspace, out of munitions, having delivered them all, but still harnessing onboard sensors and those of space-based assets to understand the environment. Detecting a target, a new target, pop-up that needs to be eliminated, the B-21 or the F-35 could connect to a naval ship in the region to fire ammunition, which in turn would be guided by the aircraft while it maintains eyes on the target. So in this very simplistic example, this is how networked information can take advantage of those who are at the right time in the right place to contribute to the ultimate objective. Together, working as a team yields much faster and more effective end result than what any one weapon system could accomplish by itself. Now, the suite of technologies underlying this architecture in the Air Force is now known as the Advanced Battle Management System, ABMS. JADC2 is the overarching concept, and ABMS is the technology that enables it. A successful execution of JADC2 will require us to address many technical, operational, doctrinal, and pragmatic questions. However, this is no longer a question of if. JADC2 is a mission imperative for all the services. We must press forward to make this vision a reality in the most rapid and competent way possible. And that's why we're really fortunate to have this panel with us today. There are some of the key leaders who are working to turn this vision into reality, and that's really what this session today is all about. So with that context, let me give you a little bit more background on our panelists. First is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategy, Integration, and Requirements at Air Force Headquarters. Lt Gen Q Hinote is responsible for developing Air Force strategy and operational concepts. Brigadier General David Abba is the Air Force Director of the F-35 Integration Office. He's a key voice advising senior Air Force leaders on this 5th generation aircraft that manifests much of the JADC2 vision thanks to its sensors, processing power, connectivity, and ability to close the kill chain in contested airspace. Dr. Tim Grayson is the Director of Strategic Technology Office at the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, better known as DARPA. And Tim's been a tremendous leader developing a concept known as mosaic warfare, a vision that will prove critical and depend on JADC2 and in many ways take it to the next level. And finally, our very own Ms. Heather Penney, who's a senior resident fellow here at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, where she focuses on leveraging critical technologies for aerospace power, and has been leading our research in the mosaic warfare arena. She has experience as a fighter pilot with multiple combat tours, as well as experience in industry. So let's kick this off after that context with giving the mic to Q first to start us off with some opening thoughts, followed by our other speakers. So over to you, Q.
Thanks, General Deptula. It's great to be with you today. And I only wish that we could be out on the West Coast. It's getting dark pretty early here on the East Coast, and we're running out of sunlight already. But hey, I want to apologize to my fellow panelist, General Abba. I was supposed to be in my blue uniform today, and I didn't realize where my blue uniform was. It's in the Pentagon, and I am not. And so therefore, I showed up in this. I was walking down the stairs, and my daughter asked me, "Dad, why are you in uniform?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to be in a panel. I'm going to be discussing parts of the future of the Air Force and the Joint Force." And she says, "Why are you wearing pants?" And so I do have to at least say I am wearing pants, even though I'm at home. And you know, in so many ways, we're in this weird time. But we're clearly seeing how connectivity matters, right? I mean, without a doubt, our lives would be so much. Can you imagine what the pandemic might have been like when we didn't have Wi-Fi, right? Life would have been so much different. And so we all understand that connectivity matters to some degree, right? I mean, we all have things that look like something like that, and we use them for a lot of different purposes. And yet there's been this sense of that, you know, the military has not yet, and you were saying this before, has not yet fully realized the connectivity and what that's going to do for joint warfare and combined warfare, because we're always going to have our allies and partners with us, and we're excited about that. This is what we're talking about. It's the leveraging of connectedness to do something that is markedly different. And, you know, we're talking about actualizing this idea of command and control in a very different way. And I would tell you that it's very, it has the smell and the sense of a revolution. And in so many ways, it's not all that different from a very important book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Kuhn. And that book talks about how in innovation, we often have revolutionary innovation or disruptive innovation, and we also have incremental innovation. And I would tell you, we're going to see both regarding JADC2. We're going to see us building a better Air Operations Center. And in fact, the technologies are there to make the Operations Center better. It'll be better in this time in 21 than it is in 20. And in fact, we're going to have on-ramps, and we're going to have ABMS left behinds and everything, and it's going to be better. But there's also this idea of disruption in that the technology is going to allow us to achieve command and control in a much different way. And this gets after the mosaic efforts that we've been working here along with Dr. Grayson and along with Ms. Penney here. And this idea that you're going to be almost totally agnostic as to where the sensing comes from. You're going to be almost totally agnostic as to where the effects come from, and you're going to be pretty agnostic as to where the decisions are made. They can be made anywhere, and all of those things coming together. to form a picture is what we're talking about. That's going to be revolutionary, and it's going to involve things that we haven't yet fully thought out when it comes to the doctrinal and conceptual approach to warfare. That's the exciting part. So we're going to see both over the next couple of years as we go through it. I'm really excited about being able to kind of break that down a little bit and talk about some of the key things that are going to get us there, both with the incremental innovation that will allow us to do command and control better, and the revolutionary innovation that will just blow our minds when it comes to what's available in command and control.
Thanks, Q. Over to you, Deke.
All right, thank you, sir. Thanks for the intro and the opportunity to participate with this talented panel. General Hinote, thanks for taking the pressure off with the uniform differential, and I'm sure you won't ever hear about that one again. Thanks to all the sponsors you named up front, General Deptula, for putting this on. It's really a tremendous opportunity to share some of the insights and the thinking that's happening still both inside the building and while everyone's at home. From an entering argument perspective for F-35, I'll be a little bit blunt up front. I don't think that anyone could have imagined today's geostrategic, geopolitical, or technology environment when we wrote the initial requirements for the F-35 about 20 years ago. But the F-35 is the most advanced fighter aircraft that's in production in the United States today, and frankly around the world. And so we've got to find ways to creatively, back to the evolutionary, the incremental, and the disruptive innovation pieces that General Hinote talked about, continue to develop and modernize this platform, produce it more effectively, sustain it effectively and affordably, and deploy it and employ it creatively. Because the F-35 brings mass. You've got all 3 United States services. You've got 7 partner nations in a multitude and growing number of foreign military sales cases around the world. I've said at other Mitchell events, and I believe this very strongly, that the F-35 is the glue that holds the freedom-loving air forces of the world together. And so if JADC2 is going to underpin all domain operations, you know, it's up to us within the F-35 and the broader community to figure out how to plug in seamlessly to that. Right, we've got to find ways to make the airplane effective in the context of today, not the context within it which it was designed. So with that said, I'll be brief with my opening comments, and I look forward to entertaining your questions. Thanks, sir.
Thanks, Deke. Over to you, Dr. Grayson.
Yeah, well, thank you, General Deptula. Thank you to the fellow panelists here, and also likewise to all the sponsors. It's a real pleasure and honor to be with you here all today. A great opportunity to get the message out. So again, thank you for all that. So General Hinote, General Abba did a really good setup for what I was going to describe. You know, the way we think about Mosaic is in this sense of what we call monolith busting. And so what General Abba described is going from the original vision of the F-35, where it was a self-contained kill chain in and of itself, to the notion of where we are today in JADC2. We think of that as busting up the monolithic platforms. How can that F-35 be the quarterback in a distributed set of kill chains? What we're looking at with Mosaic is how do we go further and bust up the monolithic architectures? And we can talk more about the specific technologies we're doing for that, but in the context of this session's topic, I want to talk a little bit about how we see this notion of Mosaic fitting with these other concepts and what we call waves of JADC2. And so really where we are today is what I like to think of as wave 1 of JADC2. So it is this, you know, fundamental shift in how we think about warfighting from the monolithic platforms to the distributed kill chains. And it's really exciting to see everything going on with efforts like ABMS, in the other services, Project Convergence and Project Overmatch, and then the various JADC2 types of things that are pulling it together. And what I see these activities as doing is we've got to get a starting point. You know, how can we, first of all, build the first set of these kill chains? More importantly, how can we get them in warfighters' hands where they can begin experimenting with them and using them to develop the supporting doctrine and tactics that they're going to need to fight in this very different way. So I see this wave 1 as being essential to lay that foundation. A lot of where we're focusing on at DARPA is what I think of as wave 2. And to put it into another analogy, I really like metaphors. We started out with Mosaic and then monolith busting. Let's talk about computers. at least those of us here on the panel, and probably a lot of the people watching, are old enough to remember the days of Windows 95. And that was a good example where we started seeing that change in our personal lives, where computers went from being sort of this mysterious thing that only lived in labs or in businesses to something you could have in your house. And you didn't have to order up a computer with a vertical stack of, yeah, I've got this word processor and this spreadsheet. You could configure it the way you want it. But now for those of you who can remember playing around with computers then, think about what it was like to hook up a new printer to your computer. You had to tear open the box. You had to go find an empty slot and stick in a specialized card and hope you didn't electrocute yourself or burn up your computer. Attach a big clunky specialized cable, and then take a floppy disk out and download some software and hope you could configure it right. It was something you could do at home. It was something available to consumers, but it wasn't something that was for the faint of heart. You had to have some level of at least technical curiosity. That's what I think of as wave 2. So what we're trying to do at DARPA is to build the toolkit that's like that Windows 95 computer and all of its peripherals. We want to get to the point where instead of the kill chains being something that are designed, in what I call acquisition time zones, things that are thought out through a requirements process, things that are put together by system engineers and then delivered as a set stack of kill chains to the warfighter. What if we could convert it to where the warfighter is actually developing the kill chains he or she needs at the moment that that site picture is right in front of them? And so they're building kill chains and architectures more as a mission planning problem, not as a system engineering problem, okay? But that's not going to happen overnight, and that's going to be sort of starting out in that Windows 95 picture. So we're building the tools and infrastructure to empower the warfighter to be that geeky kid putting together the Windows 95 computer. And one of the things we can talk about, I think, when we get to the Q&A, is even though it's outside DARPA's technology swim lane, we've been thinking a lot, and this is one of the things we're engaging Mitchell on, with how do we define the force structure that's needed to support the warfighter with something I'm figuratively calling the Combat Support Geek Squad, help attach that new printer to your Windows 95 computer. Yeah, and then to wrap up, the third wave of Mosaic is when the technology evolves, and this is beyond our current DARPA portfolio. But I am a firm believer that once we get that wave 2 in front of warfighters, it's going to continue to evolve to the app store and USB kind of world, where you can actually start building the kill chains at time of need without needing to be the technical geek. Well, what are the implications once the warfighter starts getting comfortable with that? The way we buy the new systems. What if we could start buying new platforms or sensors or weapons and not have to worry about what the exact KPPs are or what architecture they're going to go into? It's really going to change the way we think about buying those new systems. So again, outside DARPA's swim lane, but we're trying to use the opportunity for technology to drive this broader institutional change and at least start the dialogue. So, again, it's those kind of things outside our day-to-day mission area why I'm really excited to engage with organizations like this and panels like this, and hope to be able to continue working with you.
Thanks, Tim. Much appreciated. Okay, Heather, you're the cleanup batter, so you got it.
Well, thank you. I think everyone on this panel, and it's not controversial throughout the entire defense community to agree on the value of sharing information. So regardless of whether or not you call it JADC2, ABMS as the underlying concepts, Mosaic warfare as a suite of technologies, capabilities, and operational concepts, information matters, and it'll make us more effective and more efficient in the future. I mean, even the Chinese agree with us, right? Information, they recognize, is a key to success in future warfare. And they write about it within their doctrine, informationized warfare. And as they begin to incorporate machine learning and artificial intelligence, they're moving towards intelligentized warfare. So it's not just us. Everybody recognizes the value of information and being able to network and share information machine to machine in operations. So as I said, sharing information makes us more efficient and more effective. And we've seen this over the last 30 years of warfare as we begin to increase the number of data links and how we share information automatically from machine to machine. It's increased our battle space awareness, it's improved our lethality, and allows us to close more kill chains and effects chains faster than when we were doing it manually. But what I worry about here in DC land is that more effective and more efficient becomes code words for smaller. And we have to recognize that that is the wrong direction for us to move. Even as we leave the industrial era of how we fight wars and move into an informationized and intelligentized era of how we fight wars, the industrial component will still matter. The platforms that we have will still matter. And there's three main reasons for this, right? The first is just simply geography. As we look at the pure conflicts that we could potentially face, whether or not that's in Europe with Russia or within the Pacific theater against China, the vast ranges and geographies will require quantity. And that's for mass and concentration. The other thing that we need to consider is in the pure conflict, we have to be able to be prepared to withstand attrition. So we need to be able to understand that although we are doing our best to ensure survivability, that we can still operate and be effective within the face of attrition. I'm not arguing for attrition warfare, but just that it needs to become part of our calculus as we think about it. And finally, here's the real reason why quantity matters, is because those weapon systems in the battle space are nodes for the network. And the fewer nodes you have in your network, the more simple your operational architecture is, the less complex of a problem set you present to the adversary, you become much more vulnerable to their targeting, and your architecture becomes more predictable, more brittle, and less resilient. So as we understand that information makes us more effective and more efficient, we cannot allow that to become a reason or an excuse to decrease our quantity or even shrink our force structures even smaller than they are. What we need to be able to do if we truly want to be able to take advantage of informationized warfare as we begin to move into JADC2, mosaic warfare, and ABMS, is that we have to be able to understand our the nodes, the quantity we have that we put out within the battle space, and then how we can use those platforms to create a more adaptive architecture, a more unpredictable architecture, and more creative composition that really inserts uncertainty into our adversary's targeting calculus.
Okay, thanks, Heather. I'm sure that there are some folks that have some perspectives on what each of you have said, and thank you all for helping laying out the foundation of our discussion. Now, the Air Force and the Army have recently moved to collaborate on developing common standards for data sharing. General Hinote, how do you view this collaboration? And do you believe it's going to lead to solving interoperability in the context of data sharing across not just the Air Force and the Army, but all the services?
So what you say is true, and in fact, we're working very closely with the Army and with the other services. I think that's an important point. Is the Army has come up with a construct, and they've been thinking is this year, the fiscal year 21, as being the year of jointness when it comes to command and control, and then the next year being the year of allies and partners and making sure that they are brought in a way where they can be more than interoperable, but be interdependent within the system. We actually think that's a pretty good construct. So I think you're going to see a lot more jointness when it comes to co-development of standards, data standards being one of those, as well as the connections between the systems that we have and the systems that the other services are using. So interesting story. We just got a debrief from one of our field commands, and they had done a recent exercise where they were doing what you might call a mission rehearsal on a very difficult target set. And they told us that as it stands today, they would have to take the data that in the mission rehearsal, they actually did this. They would take the data off of, it just happened to be an F-35, that was using its sensors to be able to find the target that was out there. And that data was working its way through to a center somewhere. And fortunately, they were having to take the data, write it down, and what they called sneaker net it over to the Army system, where they were going to use an Army effector. In this case, it was long range artillery to take out the target. So for many of our theaters, that kill chain is a very viable kill chain today. And we could use it today. And in fact, it's kind of one of the definitional ways of thinking through multi-domain operations, right? You see something in the air, you connect it to something on the ground, and you shoot it, and it goes away. And the idea that we're sneaker netting in this day and age is just, that's not where we need to be. So we know we have to work closely and work better. So one of the things that we just decided that we were going to do is we're going to connect as much as we can together. It doesn't really matter if that connective tissue comes from a system that the Army buys, or a system that the Air Force buys, or a system that the Navy buys. Eventually, no one really cares. But what we do care is that it works at machine speeds, because otherwise you don't get the speed and scale. We are actually testing that kill chain out in one of the, I think this is going to be the Project Convergence one that we're going to do later on in FY21. And so that, and we're not going to be okay with sneaker net. So that's an example, I think, of how you're going to see the services come together and go, we're just not going to accept that anymore. If we have to translate it, if we have to use a gateway, fine. That we're always going to have some gateways, we think. We'd like to build to a standard eventually, but go back and be retroactive about those standards may not be the most cost-effective way. And to get at Heather's point, that might, if you don't have those gateways and translators, that might really push your quantity down, your options down. And we're not going to allow that to happen. And so you're going to see gateways. In fact, we're going to test some gateways out with the Army pretty much throughout 2021 as well. But those would be the types of things that you see between the Army's Project Convergence, the Navy's Project Overmatch, and of course, the Marine Corps is involved in that. And then, of course, the Air Force and the Space Force are using our ABMS system to, and they're all going to come together because they have to. We know that they have to.
Well, thanks for that explanation and example, Q. Now, Tim, kind of launching off listening to what Q had to say, I think we all agree that the ability to exchange data machine to machine is crucial to seamless interoperability and speeding up future combat operations beyond SneakerNet. Do you think we can achieve a universal standard for data sharing for the military? And what might be some of the drawbacks to mandating such a standard? Or could one even be achieved given that we've got thousands of companies, and if you go beyond the US military, we've got lots of other partners that may not be able to fit into that kind of a standard. What are your thoughts?
Well, great tee up there, General Deptula, and you know my thoughts on it. So yeah, the short answer is love standards, not a big fan of enforced top-down global standards. One of our big themes of Mosaic is this notion of federation. And I know both the general officers here have been in a lot of GOFO conferences, where this discussion comes up quite a bit. And I won't mention any names, but I've heard some of the less positive of those exchanges be things along the lines of, yeah, I am joint as long as everyone comes to my standard or my C2 center, and then we're all going to be joint. Yeah, well, the reality is there's a variety of reasons, and it's technical and it's operational. The different services, the different domains, the different military functions, even within a service, they have ways they need to do things for what their mission is. And from a technology side of things, programs are built to do certain specific functions. They're built at different timelines. If we were to say everyone has to be on this one global standard, and by the way, the DoD has tried this before. For those of you tried it quite a few times, but one that I will throw under the bus here, the Joint Tactical Radio System, jitters, and the joke is it gives people the jitters. Brilliant idea at the time to create the same kind of interoperability that we're talking about now. But it started with the notion of the global standard. Seemed like a good idea at the time, but you think about what goes into creating a global standard. First, I've got to collect everyone's requirements. And oh, by the way, it's not the requirements today, it's the requirements well into the future. We don't even know how to do that, as General Abba mentioned, really rigorously. We're always going to be surprised. So we're going to get those requirements wrong. But let's just suppose we get that global set of requirements built. Now, when you go build the Swiss Army knife that says, I've got to have a message format that accommodates all of these things, you end up with this Rube Goldberg Swiss Army knife that probably is going to have compromises in terms of some of those requirements you want to meet. And in all likelihood, it's going to be over provisioned and bloated for any given one of those functions. And then you get into the programmatic realities of all of these different programs are going to be doing recap and doing modernization on different timeframes and different scales. And there's never going to be the big bang moment where everyone can move over to the new standard all at once. So, we believe that even if we get things right, we are always going to be in a highly heterogeneous environment. And so the answer is going to be, how do we work in a federated manner? Now, I demurred a little bit with your question about do we need or want global standards? One, we really want standards. If systems are built with a well-defined, clear interface to some kind of standard, it makes this job of on-demand interoperability much, much, much simpler. Two, you got to think about what it means to create standards. And people's minds immediately go to, oh, it's some data format or some message set. Well, the reality is it might be more of a protocol. What are the engineering best practices for building your new system or exposing an interface? So that's a big theme of what we're doing. So, within our technology, one whole part of my office in our Mosaic Warfare portfolio is a thrust area we call interoperability. And that's the thing people think about with a lot of this. How do we get rid of the sneaker nets, as General Hinote said? How do we make machine-to-machine connectivity? But how do we do it at time of need as opposed to engineering it all in advance and waiting for the big bang moment? So the other thing I'll point out, and then I'll be quiet here. When we look at those technologies that are needed, we look all the way up and down that stack. Again, in this discussion right here, the mind goes to data standards and things you'd want in the data lake. But the reality is, and one of the reasons culturally I think it's important to think about those as separate problems is we've got to break this historical mindset that radio equals waveform equals network equals message set. The modern world, the commercial world is a few decades beyond that mindset when you look at the internet and what's happening with cloud and cloud of cloud and multi-cloud. And there isn't this tightly integrated vertical stack. So we need to think about the same way. So to your question about should we have a global standard, that starts with the radios. We're looking at more agile ways, and the services are as well, more agile ways to create new waveforms, just messages, but new waveforms. And can we create nodes that aren't a dedicated fixed gateway, but rather a way to have something that looks like someone's ordinary tactical radio that can speak a number of different RF languages. And if push comes to shove, serve as a gateway. We're doing a lot of things with our own programs and with the Air Force on ABMS and other activities, moving up the stack of how do you go do software-defined networking? And again, that might be machine-to-machine networking, but that's layered over a whole heterogeneous mix of legacy fabric. And we actually did a series of tests recently that combined everything as modern as Wi-Fi and some of the more modern tactical radio standards running in parallel to Link 16 and TTNT. And to the warfighter, it was seamless, just like they were using the internet. So we want to do more of that at the network layer. And then ultimately we get to the message layer that you're alluding to in data formats. And where I'll get off the stage on this question is we've been pushing very heavily this tool we call stitches. And it's a compromise between the global standard and the need to not rely on engineered translators like General Hinote was saying. You know, pre-configured engineered translators, in all likelihood, the warfighter is going to need the wrong system of systems chain. Now you're going to be stuck in back to sneaker netting. So what we've been doing with stitches, it's a software tool that writes software. And again, this is where having some standards is good. Because if you got clean data standards and known message sets and the constituent systems, Stitch's job is almost automatic. I've seen events in these gauntlets we have where they have created new kill chains and the bespoke translators for those kill chains in as short as 45 minutes. So you can imagine the warfighter sitting down, you know, sitting at jumps or something like that and saying, okay, here's my next set of sorties, way inside an ATO cycle, and immediately pop out the software you need to do that machine to machine and get rid of the sneaker net. So that's where we're going. It's more than a vision. We're actually making that happen, and the technology's there on the table, ready to go, and we figure out how to get it in the warfighter's hands.
Hey, thanks, Tim. Heather, when we consider some of the technical and operational challenges ahead, some of the ones that Dr. Grayson just mentioned, what are some of the practical considerations involved in transforming JADC2 from concept to reality? And where should we be looking to make the most progress in the fastest amount of time?
Well, I think that first of all, it's important to state that the most important thing we can do right now is accept the force structure that we do have. And how do we begin to migrate our current force structure so that it's more mosaic in the future as we begin to transform the entire force? And that means accepting that we're going to have these a diverse type of data links, that there's not going to be a global standard, and extreme agreement with everything that Q and that Tim had just said. So what that means is that the way that we are able to create the connective tissue between these diverse platforms comes down to mission integration tools. And these are like Stitches, which Tim just talked about, or SOSITE, which is another one of DARPA's programs, which functionally disaggregates weapon systems. So you can actually have machine-to-machine functionality between the subsystems of one platform and the subsystems of another platform. These are the kinds of technologies that we need to begin investing in and actually fielding in order to be able to pragmatically move the force towards JADC2, towards mosaic warfare. But the major challenge we have is that these types of technologies, because they're software-based, they're platform agnostic, they apply to every single system that we have within the inventory, are very difficult to field. They're like misfit toys when it comes to the acquisition process. So what we need to do is we need to have the senior leadership really begin to champion these kinds of capabilities, these mission integration tools, so that we begin fielding them at the appropriate operational level, all the way down to the squadron, which that's going to be our battle space edge, right? The other piece that we need to think about is, does using these tools require a different kind of airman, a different kind of operator? And we believe that it does. It's, you know, as Tim was saying earlier about, you know, it takes a special kind of person who has the curiosity and the technical know-how to be able to put together your Windows 95 computer. To use these mission integration tools, they're going to create the kill chains, that are going to construct these architectures, which again, that kind of unpredictability and adaptability is crucial when we're thinking about how to compete against China specifically in their system of systems doctrine. Presenting them with uncertainty and unpredictability is what our edge is going to be, but we have to be able to do that fast. We have to be able to adapt, and those airmen at the battle space edge will be core to that. So these multidisciplinary airmen will need to have some kind of systems engineering, software engineering, maybe some intelligence background, some operational expertise that allow them to be able to use these mission integration tools at the squadron level and on the variety at the operation levels all the way up to the AOC and even further back, so that we can begin adapting, modifying, creating those architectures at the time and point of need.
No, very good. I would also add that if we're really interested in making sure that we progress as rapidly as possible across all the services, this whole notion of interdependency and progress by each of the services needs to be at the top of the agenda of the next Secretary of Defense, so that in every weekly staff meeting, he or she turns to the collective service secretaries and asks the question, how are we progressing in accomplishing JADC2? Because without that top level leadership, and I mean Secretary of Defense interest, the services will tend to do their own thing, which they're going to do anyway, but it needs to be coordinated. So let's turn to General Abba. Deke, the F-35 is often described as an information and sensing platform, as well as a weapons platform. Could you talk a little bit about the value that the F-35 and other fifth generation aircraft bring in terms of enabling the information dominance concepts that underpin JADC2?
Yeah, you bet, General Deptula. And I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head with the framing of the question. And that's that the F-35 plays across the full spectrum of JADC2, the entirety of the kill chain. With respect to the specific fifth gen value to the information dominance piece, I am amazed by my clock. We are 41 minutes into a discussion about JADC2, and I have not yet heard someone say that we are going to create dilemmas for our adversaries. So if you're keeping score on the JADC2 bingo, I'll raise that one. And that's really where the fifth gen fleet adds value into the information dominant space. And the fifth gen fleet is going to create dilemmas primarily in a spatial sense for the adversaries. We're talking about all domain operations, but if the adversary has the luxury of being able to focus only on forces that are outside of the extended A2AD bubble, then that allows them to focus their defensive efforts because they know where the threat's coming from. If there's a force that's able to operate inside of those threat bubbles, then that forces them to reallocate their ISR and their entirety of their defensive architecture to be able to deal with that. And so that spatial proximity piece also allows us temporal dilemmas in terms of the ability to close kill chains faster. So in terms of specifics of how that happens, I'll start with the LO survivability and the electronic attack capabilities specific to F-35. There are, as Lucky mentioned earlier, mass matters depending on the type of targets that we are trying to sense and share across the grid. Proximity also matters because of the fidelity of sensors, how many pixels that certain targets are going to keep out there are going to be detectable at, or the emissions thresholds that our sensors are going to be able to detect. So being able to get close to those threats allows us to see them, allows us to establish the early parts of those find and fix operations for either hard to detect targets or especially for mobile targets. And then the way that the communications architectures are designed in these platforms are designed to share data rapidly, primarily amongst that fighter fleet itself, but then also to offboard that data quickly. There are certain use cases that require the sneaker net for the things that we didn't plan for 20 years ago. There are ways that we can share MATL more aggressively, or MATL data, the F-35 data link data faster, and we can also offboard data via Link 16, and then there's some other additional promising technologies. But back to Lucky's commentary earlier about resiliency and redundancy of communication pathways, having the ability to promulgate more nodes closer to the threat really complicates the adversary's targeting. So I think there are a variety of ways that are not necessarily the traditional ways we think about the employment of stealth and other fifth gen platforms that add value to the information dominance piece.
Muted.
Man, you would think by this time narrating so many of these, I would have figured that out. But, those F-35s in the background were making so much noise, I had to mute it. But Deke, you brought up the issue of time, and I wanted to make sure that we leave plenty of time for Q&A from our large audience participation. So I want to thank all of you for your comments on these critical issues in this subject area to this point. And on behalf of AFA's Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, wish you all the very best as you continue to deal with these and many other challenges that affect the security and well-being of every American. With that, what I would like to do is open the session to questions from the audience. As a reminder, I'd ask that you use the raise hand function. When I call on you, please state your name and your organization. Before we get to the raised hands, we have a couple of questions in the audience. Let me kick this off with one from Dennis Moore. When you are interconnecting various systems between the services, is there anyone who is identifying the coordinated interfaces to ensure that certain parameters and standards are defined as requirements in order to ensure actualization of this concept? Now, it was not directed to anyone, but Q, you want to kick off on that one?
Absolutely. So this is a really interesting question. And just the fact that we use the R word, requirements, is fascinating. And here's why. There are kind of two sides of this. Is that in general, we've always thought that we could use requirements as the voice of the warfighter to say, we need this, and acquisition, go buy us this. And what we're learning is that the technologies are going to offer us possibilities that right now we don't know. We can't require what the warfighter is going to need in 10, 15 years. And I think this is where Dr. Grayson gets it exactly right, where we start talking about the warfighter putting together the kill chains almost on demand. So how do you write that into a requirement? So what we are doing is we are capturing requirements as the technologies open up possibilities. So that means you have to think very differently about requirements. And oh, by the way, there are in the acquisition processes, there are new things written into the statute and the corresponding regulations on requirements. We can do the requirements process in an agile way. And we're learning how to do that. And right now, ABMS is the poster child for it, because what we're doing is we're experimenting, we're talking to combatant commands, we're finding out what their problems are, we're putting together things that might actually address their problems, we're testing it out, and we have success. And then we capture the requirements in an agile requirements document. And then that is now something that we can build to as we go forward, and we create programs of record. And having that feedback loop in the requirements process is something that we think has the potential to really change how we go and buy things. This is something that we have talked about extensively in what many of you know as the Joint Requirements Operations Council. Joint Requirements Oversight Council, led by General Hinote on the joint staff. And he is the one that is pushing us right now to think very differently about requirements in this agile way. So the answer on the capturing of requirements is we are thinking ahead, but we're also seeing what the technology allows us to do, and we're feeding that back into the requirements.
Oh, very good. Thank you very much. Valerie and Cinna.
Hi, thank you guys all for doing this today. My question is for General Hinote and for General Abba. The Air Force is doing these ABMS on-ramps. You've got AFWIC that's doing, a lot of future force planning and futures game, all sort of figuring out these new technologies that might be needed either to increase connectivity or introduce new capabilities that are going to be needed for the near peer fight. So I was wondering, how is that influencing the input that the F-35 integration offices then takes to the JPO to kind of direct future block upgrades and software updates? And can you guys point to anything in particular where, looking at ABMS or something like that, the Air Force was able to maybe come up with a new requirement or say, hey, I think we might have a gap here, you know, in the future that the F-35 needs to fill, that then is pushed to the JPO and sort of worked that way.
Yeah, I think I can take this one. So Val, I think the key thing that I would draw out here is, you know, as I explained back in March, you know, trying to drive F-35 requirements is a unique animal within the department because of the nature of the international partnership and just the broad perspectives that we have to bring in. And we are on a very regularized battle rhythm from the F-35 international governance structure and architecture. But when we go back to some of the comments that General Hinote just made and Dr. Grayson made too about the inability to predict the future evolution of technology, some of the impact of the ABMS on-ramps that we're seeing is frankly the desire to perhaps reprioritize within already agreed upon, already vetted and already funded capabilities, particularly within Block 4, because as our understanding of where our adversaries are going and the very tightly coupled competition that we're in right now, you know, while we couldn't accurately predict the future, you know, with a high degree of precision a number of years ago, we knew broadly where we needed to go, and that helped us develop that broad bin of capabilities that collectively we refer to as Block 4. And as we go through these on ramps and experiments, we're effectively reprioritizing those. We help represent that through our interactions with Air Combat Command and with the rest of the Air Force stakeholders, and ultimately in the JPO, as you mentioned. Hopefully that helps.
All right, let's turn to Rachel Cohen.
So, you know, General Hinote started kind of getting into this, but I'm curious how you're starting to lay the groundwork to be able to, you know, execute really quickly on what the JROC is going to roll out for JADC2 over the next couple months, and how that is affecting how you're planning for fiscal 22 and over the FIDIP.
Thanks, Rachel. Yes, and in fact, you know, the J6 has been given the responsibility of working through some of the future planning and like we were talking about, the standards interfaces and things like that. So we're involved in that as well. And I will tell you what, from everything that I know, we are in sync with that as we go forward with the ABMS on-ramps and the project convergence and the things that are going on. So I don't see that there's any real divergence except for just where we're going to experiment and learn. And then we'll feed that back, as I was talking about, back into the JROC process. But it's clear that General Hyden is very interested in us moving forward in a much more, first of all, rapid way. Speed does matter when it comes to fielding these things. And I think that will be a major theme of 22 when we start talking about, you know, what we have already learned and how quickly we can get something to our warfighters that allows them to begin to realize the power that is involved in connectedness. And so I suspect that what you're going to see is a pretty major acceleration in 22 and then more so in 23. This is something that, you know, a year and a half ago, we were just trying to get in the door talking about command and control across the joint force. We were competing against many other things. And now there's widespread agreement to include in the JROC that this is the most critical thing we are going to do as a joint force to make ourselves more capable. And that's a major movement, but we have to accelerate. And that's what we're going to be talking about in 22 and 23.
Thanks very much.
Okay, Bruce Wright.
Hi, Q. Dave, can you hear me okay?
You bet.
Q, great to see all of you, Penny, and Dave, thanks again for leading this terrific panel. For Q, first of all, it's terrific to have the Wolf leading at your level, and thank you. As all of you know, your Air Force Association continues to work very hard, and it's a challenge to accomplish our mission to educate the public about what our Department of the Air Force is all about, our airmen and space professionals. So Q, for you, what would you offer in words all Americans might understand why our nation needs the relative lethality of the Department of the Air Force in joint operations and to lead in our warfighting capabilities to deter and defeat peer enemies?
You're right. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for your leadership as well. I'll start with this. We are a victim of our own success. There are people on this panel who have set us up with too much success, I might say. And here's the thing: we have been the dominant force in air and space power for decades. There has been no country that has benefited from the control and exploitation and the diplomacy that comes with that and the economic opportunities that come with that of air and space like we have. And in so many ways, what did the Soviets fear? Well, I'll tell you, they feared our Air Force. What happened as we got into wars in the Middle East? Our people never had to worry about what might be coming on top of them. We're at the stage now where we have been so successful that it's hard for anybody to imagine that somebody could challenge us in the air. Yet that's what's going on. Clearly, we have competitors that have the ability, they have learned, they have gone to school on us, and they've invested in good ways. You have to give them credit. We have worthy adversaries in this world, and we all want peace. Your Air Force, along with the Joint Force. I mean, I don't want to get the sense that it's just us pounding our chests, but you need deterrence in our world. And your Air Force gives you that. Your Air Force keeps what would be the world's worst day from happening, because our competitors know that were they to overstep, were they to push too far, they would have to see us coming back at them. And in this dangerous world, that's important. And it's why we have to keep investing, and why we have to keep appreciating the economic opportunities that come with air power, the diplomatic opportunities that come with air power, and the hard power of having to go and be ready to defeat if you have to. That's something I think the American people want. And it's something that we're going to continue to work our tails off to provide, knowing that we have to change now because our adversaries has changed. The environment has changed. And as my chief likes to say, I'm going to hold up his paper. It's kind of wrinkled now because I read it so much, but we have to accelerate change or we'd lose, and we're not going to be okay with that. So we're going to keep talking about air power. We're going to keep talking about what it brings to the American people, which we would say is a better chance at peace.
Thanks so much. And thanks, Tim and Heather and Dave again. Really appreciate it.
Okay, we have time for one more, and let me take one from a text message. This is from Steve Burke. How are the regional combatant commanders, their component commanders, and joint task forces being engaged within JADC2 demos and experiments to get their buy-in and trust in joint task force operations where the sensor, effector, and decider can be anywhere? Not directed to anyone, maybe Tim or Q, anyone want to take that one?
Sure, I'm willing to start with that. So, I'll say two things there. One is we've already been with a lot of our experimentation, working with ABMS and the other services on exactly this problem. And frankly, because of the joint nature of this problem, the combatant commanders really have been our heroes and linchpins in all of this. So it isn't a case of how are we going to work with them. It's almost like they're screaming for this kind of thing and saying, how do we figure out the best way to engage and provide them things? And a great example is what just happened a month or two ago with the ABMS last on-ramp. That was based upon a combatant commander, in this case, NORTHCOM, mission problem that was laid out related to defense of the homeland. And so it's a great example of where the combatant commanders are laying down what, first of all, the problem set is. And I won't use the R word, but I'll say the mission need is that's driving this kind of JADC2 thinking. And also providing that operational construct in which to go do these experiments. And then we can come in with our technology, and we've actually got a realistic environment in which to try out the technology. And I think it's really key. I had the pleasure back about 3 or 4 years ago when I was out working as a consultant for the modernization study that at the time Dep Shanahan had chartered. And one of the key things that came out of that modernization study was a mission-centered department. You're simultaneously working novel military construct in parallel to the new capability. JADC2 engagement with the COCOMs and the MADCOMs gives us that opportunity to simultaneously innovate operations and technology. The last thing I'll say there is what I'm really hoping comes out a lot of this, and we're starting to see this happen, is for some of our technology, particularly the C2 tools, can we bypass the traditional program office acquisition kind of flow and provide the software from these experiments directly in the hands as leave behind of the warfighters. It's just software. Let them continue the on-ramps, continue the experiments, and get into this DevSecOps spiral that allows them to continue to refine it continuously. There's no end state based upon what that mission need is. I think it's a tremendous opportunity, and excited to see the warfighter engagement that's happening.
You look like you want to jump in there.
Yeah, no, General Atula, I was just scrolling through the questions, and I think there's a really important one that Mike Boyer asked. And he says, can requirements be captured fast enough to inform Capitol Hill and get the funding needed to move forward positively? So I suspect what he's talking about is right now we have a mark in one of the appropriations. They haven't come together quite yet. So in one of the appropriations bills, we have a mark in there that is saying that we aren't doing a good enough job of talking about requirements for ABMS. And the thing that I'll say is twofold. It's going to be really hard to produce value when we're having to think, we're building 22 right now, right? I mean, this is the way that the world works, is we're always working 1 to 2, 3 years ahead. And of course, we're required to turn in money over a 5-year development plan, right? So you're really talking about a plus or minus of 8 years. And there would be almost no technology company that would feel good about what happens in 5 years. And I would just invite anybody that wants to go talk to some of the really successful technology companies that are leading the way. And they'll tell you that, they're learning and growing all the time, but they would not really have high confidence in anything they thought about in 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So we have got to come up with a compromise with the people's representatives when it comes to defining requirements in the future. So here's what I think this is going to look like in the future. One, it is absolutely critical that the Congress has proper oversight over things like the buying of the ABMS system and any other system that we might go purchase. And this is be especially true of how important ABMS is going to be for the overall joint force. Second, it's going to be really hard for us to say what we're going to spend money on in 8 years. So let's figure out a way that we can have an iteration with Congress, i.e. maybe we can come over and talk to them every 3 months. Maybe we can invite them over and show them what we're doing every 3 months. Maybe there's a battle rhythm that happens where there is proper oversight of the spending of the resources to include auditing, so that we get the most value out, but also understanding that in today's world, the way that we're going to get better, the way that we're going to find the potential of technology and purchase it for the good of the warfighter is going to have some sense of iteration to it. And we're going to have to figure that out as a team when it comes to us and the Department of Defense and our defense committees and the overall Congress when it comes to their stewardship of the taxpayer dollars. We all agree they need oversight. We just can't provide them the amount of information that to make them comfortable with the old system with as fast as things are changing. So let's come up with a compromise. Let's come up with a way of information exchange that allows us to move forward together and ask the questions, and we'll show you what we've got. And you can come see the developmental plans that we're doing. One of the things that we've done recently is I've invited, I won't say which ones, but I've invited a significant amount of professional staff to come help me shape war games, not to get out briefs of war games, to help me shape war games. And that has been a fundamental change in the conversation. And I think we can do something very similar as we plan out the way that we experiment and grow together as a joint force in JADC2.
Well, thanks very much, Q, for snagging that one. It is a subject for an entire session on its own, and that's how do we bring the Congress out of its 200-year-old set of processes, not just into the 20th century or the 19th century, but the 21st century. I mean, recall until just a couple months ago, you couldn't have votes unless you were present. Hello. Okay, well, we've come to the end of our West Coast Aerospace Forum event. And before we wrap this up, I want to alert our listeners that the Mitchell Institute's new podcast series entitled Aerospace Advantage is now available on our website. So please feel free to go to our website and check out the first episode on the fundamentals of aerospace power. And finally, let me thank you all once again to General Hinote, General Abba, Dr. Grayson, and Heather Penney, to you and all of our audience, from all of us at AFA's Mitchell Institute. Have a great aerospace power kind of day. Thank you all.